Start my video, yeah. There we go, great. Good afternoon all. I'm Alex Pears of Exella Property Consultancy. I set up Exella to advise occupiers like yourselves on your workspace. I've worked with companies such as Ubisoft, IGN, Yuki, Future Games in London in the past. At Exella, we like to provide a tailored service to each of our clients on your property needs. We pride ourselves in delivering great projects to all our clients and having a lot of fun whilst doing so. Today, I'm partnering with Hannah Nardini of WKspace. I've worked very closely with Hannah over the last 5 years and have found her service and knowledge invaluable to my clients. Since the beginning of the pandemic, Hannah has been carrying out regular online surveys to over 50,000 different companies. Her info and stats are fascinating and thought-provoking. I'm now going to pass over to Hannah.
Thank you very much. Okay, I think I just need to start my video. Perfect, thank you very much. So thank you, Alex, for the introduction. So yes, a little bit about us. We are an independent workplace specialist. So we're a consultancy practice that also do interior design and behavioural change management. And like yourselves and the companies that you're associated with, we also noticed a dramatic change in our business really since March. Obviously not many people would be talking to workplace consultants when their offices are empty. So it's been a learning curve for us as well. But what we started to do was embark on some global surveys starting on March the 30th. And we've been running these on a weekly basis and still continue to do so. As well as the 50,000 occupiers that we've been researching. We actually have a total of, as of yesterday, 192,000 survey responses as part of our data set. And we were really interested to, once we were asked to join in this webinar with yourselves, we were really interested to understand the data from more of your sector. So we actually ran a couple of surveys that were targeted around your industry. So we have 2,000 survey responses, and the data I'm going to share with you today is very much built around your particular sector. It is very much focused around future ways of working. But what we know from experience is the best way of looking at this is to actually really understand how things have gone so far and see what we can learn from this experience. And rather than just asking people simply, do you want to work from home in future, we need to be a little bit more scientific about our approach to this. So one of the first places we've started is to really understand how are people finding working from home. Now, what's been really fascinating with the UK in particular is when the weather was great, people's experiences generally were pretty good. They felt pretty happy working from home. We do notice that the sentiment in the UK changes with the weather and it changes with the media. And sure enough, nights draw in, the clocks have changed, the weather has changed, and sure enough, people are maybe not enjoying working from home as much as they once were. We've definitely noticed a decline across all sectors within the UK on their experiences working from home. But as you can see from your sector more specifically, on the whole, it has been highly successful. People do enjoy working from home. We see that 50% of people say that they actually feel more productive working from home. We will touch on that in a moment as to whether that is really what it seems. Maybe the relationships with clients haven't changed as much, although we do notice even though 34% of people have said, I'm still able to very adequately connect with my colleagues, there's 38% of people who feel that maybe the relationships within the teams have started to decline. But one of the biggest areas that we notice is taking a bit of a pounding is around motivation. People are starting to feel quite demotivated. I think a lot of people are telling us that they're dragging themselves to the Christmas break. And I think a lot of people feel the same about this. So whilst it has been very highly beneficial, there are also things we can learn from. So we're asking people around their experiences. Actually, what have your experiences been? And you can see from these percentages that actually not having to do that commute has been a highly positive. What we do notice is people have absorbed their commuting time into their work day. So people have typically gained an extra hour, 2 hours, in some instances 3 hours into their working day. Coincidentally though, the people who say that they are working longer hours are also exactly corresponding with the people who are saying they are more productive working from home. It stands to reason that you're more likely to be more productive working from home if you have more hours available in your day. So we do think to some extent it is a little bit of a misnomer to look at productivity in the true sense of purely increasing just because of the environment that you're working in and working from home. But there are lots of positives, not having to do that commute. And some people are now sort of thinking back to all of those hours that you potentially sit in traffic or cram yourselves onto a train, really turned off by the idea of having to do that much in future. So it has changed people's outlook quite strongly. With it is the fact that people do feel that they're saving time, money, they have better work-life balance as general feeling. And what's quite interesting, and again, this is very much your industry sector, 46% have proved to themselves that they can actually do this role differently, which is quite interesting. We noticed that working from home was maybe not much of a common pattern for a lot of individuals. Some people felt that the technology that they were using was so highly specialised, it was driving a lot higher occupation in the office to actually be able to access that. This sudden shift in ways of working has actually proved that actually it does work. I can do this quite effectively in a different way. And that's actually been quite a surprising experience for some people. But there are negatives. The negatives mostly being around social isolation. People acutely feel quite lonely. It's noted more particularly in the younger of the age groups and the impact that potentially has on mental well-being. But we're also noticing perhaps a little bit more compromise to workplace culture and maybe team culture and that team connectivity. Some people just feel like they're one of a number now. They've lost the feeling of being an individual within the organisation. And a lot of managers and leaders are starting to notice this too, which is why there's a lot more conversation around actually the value of coming back together in the workplace, not full time, but necessarily saying that there is an opportunity for us to perhaps create events where we do come together. Motivation, as we mentioned, people agree that they are finding themselves in a slightly more demotivating environment right now. But also a third of people, and again, very sector specific, are saying they don't really have the right environment. For some people, they're house sharing, they may be having to work from their bedrooms, they maybe have a lot of technology, they don't really have the suitable setup or ergonomics in which to do this most effectively. But despite the negatives, the positives are still outweighing it, which is quite interesting when we start to look at what this means for future ways of working. From a wellbeing perspective, we've been really interested to understand how people's wellbeing has been impacted. On the whole, it's great to see people actually feel quite positive about it. So the work-life balance that came through as one of the positives is without a doubt having a positive effect on your individual wellbeing. But you'll notice that there's actually 28% of people are saying that it's had a very negative impact on them. We did notice this was particularly higher amongst the younger of the generations that sit within the workplace. So with your Gen Z, your millennials, we're pretty much looking at kind of 18 all the way through to around 35 as an age group, are particularly much more acutely noticing the impact on the well-being. We've noticed in the past 3 months as well, across all sectors, that there's some key taglines coming through in the surveys now. Prior to kind of, if you think back to around September time, we weren't seeing many people complain about joint pains and backaches. All of a sudden they've started to appear. Working from home has gone on longer than I think a lot of people are anticipating, and some people haven't invested in the ergonomic environments that they need. So we are starting to see quite a lot of people, you notice from these stats here, starting to think about, actually my back does hurt a lot more, or I'm not really moving my eyes off the screen. Some people are sitting for 10 hours a day in constant meetings, and we're not really having that downtime where maybe face-to-face meetings we would have been mixing our focus a little bit. Now in themselves, we look at the percentages and think, well, they're not that bad, but let's fast forward to 18 months time. Are we going to see people being much more absent from the workplace because of illnesses directly related to the time period that we're living in now? So we're advising our clients really to start putting in measures and interventions in place now to perhaps manage the ergonomics of their workers. But other impacts we notice from wellbeing, social isolation comes out top. So some people are really missing other people, and it's that casual social conversation that people seem to be missing, or the water cooler chats. Some people are really struggling with the fact there is no separation between the work and their personal life. It's all bled together, and some people really acutely struggle with that. There's also stress and anxiety. The economy is not in the best of places, and people are concerned very much so about their job security. It's much higher as well in people who have previously been furloughed. There's less physical activity. Some people, again, sat for 10 hours, not really moving. I can relate to this myself. I've gone from 10,000 steps a day to about 2,000, just not moving as much. And some people are really starting to feel that. And then some people are just saying it's like Groundhog Day. They don't really get any variety. They're not mixing things up. And someone in the survey last week said that the biggest excitement of their week was rotating their desk around so that they had a different view. It's kind of a bit of a sad state of affairs that we find ourselves in these kind of situations, and these impacting our well-being. So moving on, looking at new starters, we do appreciate that osmosis learning is being compromised. So not being around other people where they can be mentored or coached might take its toll in future when we start to look at the professional progression. But we asked new starters, and by that we refer to people in the past 12 months, what their thoughts were on coaching and whether they felt that that could be done more virtually, or do they feel that actually that's better in person. You'll actually notice the majority of people feel that whilst virtual coaching has worked and they don't feel deterred by that, they do feel that there's a place for both. Now, what's interesting here is a lot of managers tell us that actually new starters will have to come back into the workplace because of being coached. But interestingly, that thought is not necessarily reflected the other way around. So new starters feel that actually there's a place for both, and in person in part, but also the ability to still continue to do that virtually in future. How about client relationships? Generally, the feeling is that they've stayed the same. A lot of people accept that we're in this together. It's the same for everybody. We've just had to adapt. For some people, they feel that new relationships in particular have been negatively impacted. The feeling is if you've got a strong relationship with a client previously to COVID, then switching it to virtual means has actually been quite highly effective. But moving it from a new relationship and going straight into virtual maybe hasn't been so effective. The general feeling is that 3 meetings are needed in person with a new client to really build the trust and the rapport before you could actually effectively move that meeting more into virtual means. But asking people their thoughts on how do you feel about virtual meetings, you can see the majority of people feel that they have been successful, they do work, and we will continue to do them in future. But nevertheless, we are starting to see the re-emergence of people feeling that there's a place for face-to-face meetings. We're never actually going to see them disappear. Particularly the older of the generations, the baby boomers in particular, have much stronger pull towards more face-to-face interactions. But we do see it less around internal meetings and more around perhaps external meetings or with suppliers and guests or clients. So asking people about the thoughts of the workplace, how important is it to you now? So having worked from home for the past sort of 10 months or so, how do you feel about the office that you once left? What we generally see is 55% of people are saying it is still really important to me, but not as much as it once was. In fact, we have 11% of people saying we don't need an office at all, but we are talking about a much smaller percentage. There's 7% of people who are just unsure. They haven't really thought it through. But the office is not dying and it's not disappearing. There is still a need for it, but I think what we've started to realise is the need for it has changed, and the role and the purpose is different, and the reasons why we will go there potentially are different. But instead of being this place that we always go to Monday to Friday, maybe that in itself is what is going to be different going forward. So asking people, well, what would your office setup look like? And there was a number of choices to this. There was an opportunity to perhaps look at a WeWork kind of co-working environment where there's lots of other businesses sharing that space with you. It's around that hub and spoke model, so hub offices where you can just drop in and be with some of your colleagues, but you have your own identity, versus your main office, be that a central headquarters, your main head office, your just central office. What we notice in your sector, which is slightly different to others, is actually there's a stronger pull towards the larger central office. There was 6% of people again in this point who were saying we don't need the office at all. They're a pretty close tie, but actually coming together as much more part of a work community was seen as actually a much bigger pull. So when we start to reason with people, if you were going to be doing more working from home, would you support perhaps working in a different way? And one of the areas we explored was around desk sharing. Now, I know there's a lot of conversation around this, and it tends to put a lot of fear into people at the thoughts of hot desking. But as you'll notice from this, actually, 58% of people or employees are very supportive of this idea. In the interest of being fair, we don't need this much space. We could actually be doing things a little bit smarter. And on the whole, they were saying that they did support the idea of sharing space. And this presents a lot of opportunities to employers. But that's not to say that working from home is the cheapest of options. It isn't. We do know that based upon the DSE regulations, 50% of your time working from home or more it is expected that an individual would have the same type of setup that they would expect to see in the office. And therefore, this comes at a cost. So if you are looking to switch to more remote working, we do need to factor in the costs of doing this. And that might mean that you have to supply all of the equipment they need, and it might be around even maintaining that. So who actually owns the asset? And there's lots of tax implications that go with this. But we're also seeing a lot more conversation around increase of costs. So yes, people are offsetting the cost of not traveling. However, they're also telling us, I'm now heating my house for 9 hours, which I wasn't having to do if I were in the office. So there's additional costs that are starting to come into play. This is now starting to become a bigger conversation, which is why it's important to get on top of that and realise that there is a cost to be counted. So asking people long term, what do you think your ideal working pattern would be? This is actually, when we benchmark this against all of our other data sets, it's maintaining almost the same type of levels, and it has been for about the past 4 months. On the whole, the majority of people see that spending 3 days at home and 2 days in the office is kind of the pattern they're looking for. Slight difference again in your sector. The next common denominator to this is 2 days at home and 3 days in the office. So slightly higher. If we look at this in other sectors, the average occupation per day would come out around 36%. What we notice in your area, it's around 40% occupation based upon individuals having their preferred working pattern. The reality, though, when we start to look at all of the pros and the cons, we look at how different age ranges have coped with this situation, different personality types, and also the flexibility. We're likely to see, if people were to be working in the office for, say, 2 days a week, occupation might actually level out around 60%. Now, going back to pre-COVID days, you may have peaked at around 76%. So we are definitely seeing a shift down, but maybe not in the same proportions that some people are thinking. Some people have been very rash to say, let's get rid of 50% of our real estate. Actually, the data doesn't fully support that. We need to be a little bit more strategic in how we think about this. So just asking people what they think is useful and it's interesting, but it shouldn't actually be the foundation of your key decisions going forward, because the world looks different today and it will look different tomorrow and it'll look different in January. So we always need to allow a little bit of flexibility into some of these things. But what we do know is the reasons why people go into the office will change. So if we think about the fact that focus working is more likely to happen at home, which means less open plan in the office. But the reason that people are going to come into the office is to work with their colleagues. It's about creativity, it's meetings, and it's to socialize. That fundamentally changes how space is distributed in the workplace. And again, this is presenting a lot of opportunities to you going forward. So to summarize with the key reasons, we asked in a separate question to get people to narrate their key reasons. In addition to collaboration, sometimes it's just about having the right type of work setup. For some people, it's about the technology that they need. But let's not forget, this sense of work community is important. People want to feel a part of something bigger, which is why the workplace needs to satisfy that particular need. So my final slide. In essence, if we just summarize some of the key themes, we're likely to see occupation sit somewhere between 40 and 60% in the workplace. It will differ, and this needs to be analysed at local level. The reason why people go in will be different. So it will be a workplace that's built much more around collaboration, creative thinking, meetings and socialising, but we're likely to see more focus happening at home. But that's not to say that you don't need any of these spaces in the office. We know that our diaries don't quite pan out in the way that we get one complete day to focus. So we do still need these types of environments. We're likely to see 2 to 3 days working at home as the expected norm. We've seen employees rise in their power. They've proved that they can do this and they can be trusted, and therefore they're more likely to influence decisions that you make by having a say. They can push back. But it's also important that we don't go back to a two-class system of those who are in person and those who are virtual. So parity of experience is one of the big conversations that's starting to be had. So these are just some of the common themes that we recommend you look out for. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand you back.